Now I've gotten to um, a very critical point in my brother Justin's life. Um, I'm gonna try to keep from saying her real name. I think I'll call her Wendy. I don't know. I'm probably gonna end up putting her picture on here anyway, but I mean, this is partially a story of her. Um, as well, she'll probably never be anywhere near this. So, anyway, as I had mentioned in my previous video, my brother was getting into an age where all his friends, with that camaraderie that was so vital to him, was fracturing as his friends found long term girlfriends, getting married, and also his younger brother getting married and starting, a family. Um, he really felt behind, um, and left behind and alone, discouraged because he was not where they were. Um, I think he romanticized their relationships and wanted that for himself. Now, mind you, I've met all these people and their spouses, and they seem to have, at that time, really good relationships. But I saw some problems, and I think it was probably pretty average for couples. Um, but I think he really saw something else, some things. I think he really had on rose tinted glasses when he looked at their relationships, and that's what he really wanted for himself. Um, but he would never have that for two reasons. It doesn't exist, is number one. Um, Number two, uh, he was he was in a point where he had a drinking problem. It had gone into that realm of, dude, you got a problem and you need to do something about it. It was um, where his friends with their girlfriends and wives, and they'd all get together. He'd be without a partner, so he felt conspicuous. And they they would drink and stuff a lot on the weekends, special trips and vacations. But during the week, they were doing married couple life, keeping the house going to bed early to get up for work. And my brother was living a different life, and that was drinking every night. Uh, Partly because by now that was just what he did, and he would feel uncomfortable with himself and where he was in life, um, and feel very negative so he drank every day by now. Um, but uh, it wasn't quite in your face yet. He I mentioned he had one girlfriend and for a while and it didn't work out. And I believe he told me, or somebody told me, it was because of his drinking that he would badger people so much into drinking with him all every day, and then he'd get drunk, and he was a depressed drunk. He was also a um, drunk dialer, um, and he constantly talked about how lonely he was. Um, why can't he have what his friends have? Why can't he meet someone? It's because he's short and he's going bald. And um, I'm like, no, it's not that. It's A, you aren't comfortable with being yourself alone. Your lack of self-confidence is a deterrent. And he would I think he would be a little too desperate maybe and try to rush a little too fast. And then he would get irritated, like if he would ask a girl out and they had to work or something like that, and he would get, it's because this, it's because that, and make them feel bad. And so he just wasn't pleasant. I imagine from what I experienced that he would be a pain in the ass to be someone to date. So I am not saying he has no faults, but he did meet this person. I'm going to call her Wendy. I don't know if I said that already. But Wendy had problems of her own. She was pretty, blonde, slender. She did her own share of drinking. But and she was, I think she had like borderline personality disorder, because there was a lot of like, one minute they would be intensely happy and act really like he had dreamed he want all he wanted, and then the next second she would be angry and not speaking to him and wanting to leave. And I can understand that she may have had some issues with his drinking, and that was part of the problem. But another part of the problem is that she was a manipulative witch. But I don't mean witch. She saw how fragile he was, with his own self-esteem and that. And I think she took advantage of that, and I think sometimes she played with him to get what she wanted, or just to mess with him because um, she had him tied in knots. But he loved her. More than that, when they did, yes, they got married, um, and they made such a pretty picture um, in their pictures. Um, she already had a son, young son. I think at the time he may have been 3-ish, 4-ish. Anyway, um, my brother, well, now he had instant, like, just add water family. Um, and he could talk on the same wavelength as his friends now. He was one of them. He was in the club. And he loved because he passed away. But I imagine even still, even though he's not here, he loved that boy. He wanted to be a father to that boy so bad. His real father was not in the picture. And my brother Justin was he just I want to say shined, but that's not a word. Shone, I mean, you could just see it emanating from his face when he was a boy. He spent most of his time at his grandparents' house, so they raised him more than his mother did. And my brother wanted him to spend more time with him and Wendy in their home so they could be a family unit. Besides that, he felt that this little boy had some behavior issues. Um, Not really behavior issues, but they thought that perhaps and I think he was on the autism spectrum. He had a normal IQ, but he was not socially. He was removed from the other kids, but he didn't mind. It didn't bother him. It bothered everybody else. But his grandparents kind of didn't help the situation. They kind of kept him in a infant as he got older, in an infantile state. And my brother, when he was a different kid, when it was just him and my brother would not, he was never physical or anything like that with them, but my brother would not tolerate tantrums. You know, he would not give in. They would go do stuff together, or do stuff at home together. And whereas he'd pretty much been left alone with his toys, with his mom and his grandparents, they didn't interact with him very much. And he was a totally different kid when he was alone with my brother. But as soon as he got around his mom or his grandparents, he would start having tantrums and blowouts and blow-ups. And anyway, at least there was that. And even after they separated and divorced, he wanted to still be in the boy's life. And this crazy woman, his mother, would use that to manipulate my brother. Just, I think, really just for fun. It was really sad. Um, so it's right, and I would say so early, like 30 to 35. I'm guessing he everything was bright and shiny, and slowly nosedived. And he, I later found out this is when he was starting to get DUIs. Um, and probably when the secretive drinking was really a thing, um, there was a difference in his physical appearance. Towards the end of that period, he started to dress in really baggy clothes. And I later found out that he wore those things because he could hide a bottle of vodka in like a big pocket or a big hoodie pocket, but usually it was in like a baggy jean pocket in the front. And honestly, you could never see it until I found out later. But that was after they were apart. So I would say, like, for maybe 2 years, he had a moment in the sun. And then things started falling apart. I'm sure his alcoholism played a big part of that. Arguments over her son, the boy, work. He did get a really good, well-paying job. He had a nice truck. They lived in a nice house. And mysteriously, these things started to go away, and she started spending time at her parents' house. And he didn't seem like towards the end, when things fell into a separation, he seemed very lost, very distraught. Every single phone call was about her and his loss of her. And when he was he was starting to change a little bit physically. He was getting a beer gut, but it was not a beer gut, it was ascites. And he was starting to look kind of bloated, and his face got rounder. And, when she, said it's over, he didn't take care of himself as much. The job went, truck went, house went. He didn't shave anymore, grew out a beard. He used to be, you'll see the pictures. He was used to be an immaculate man. He was picky about his clothes. They had to be, Ralph Lauren and Polo, and he had all these colognes, nice colognes. Everything he had was nice. Always had his hair nice. He always looked sharp. And to see him in this state was shocking. And this is when the phone calls started. And he would just call anybody that would pick up the phone. He'd be drunk and he'd go on for an hour, 2 hours about her, about Wendy and how she ruined his life. And then she did this weird ass thing and just showed up out of the blue, spent a night with him, and then disappeared again. Gave him all this hope, and then, he was so low, and she just showed up. I was so angry at her for doing that, because it only made it worse. When he told me what happened, I wish I was like the older sister in me kicked in, and I wish I knew where she lived. I wish I were not so far away. And so, he was drinking a lot to numb the loss, numb the pain. He would drink to punish himself. I think he was getting frightened because he could not keep a job. He was in debt. He was anxious. His self-esteem was just nothing. And he was lonely. All those friends he had still had their wives, and now they had children, and he was alone. I think the drinking was really starting to, I think the problem with trying to get a job and keep a job, I think that he was drinking during the day by that time, and that is why he couldn't keep a job. He would, I know he lived in an apartment for a while with a friend. He basically had nothing and nowhere to go, and he went through between this time and his, say, 42 years old. He went from a friend's house in California, his best friend. They said, yes, you can come out here, but you're gonna have to get a job. You're gonna have to clean your act up with the drinking. But they drank themselves. And how is that going to work? Right? That's not going to work. He was incapable of being a weekend drinker, um, a couple of drinks a night drinker. And he, there's two parts to the panic he would have. There was the panic of fear of failure, going to a job interview or something, fear of failure. And the other thing is, when you're an alcoholic, you're always plotting the whole day out. When am I going to be able to drink? Because at this point, physically, his body knew and would let him know if he hadn't drank something in so many hours. And he would have a panic attack and not even be able to go to a job interview because of the panic. And then he drank and then he'd end up drinking and never going. He just hung out and drank. It ended up at their house, so they booted him out. And he went to our younger brother's house. They let him stay there, and they had the same ultimatum: no drinking. And they weren't big drinkers, but no drinking. You get a job. You're not gonna sit around and drink all day. And that's where he was slipping into. And they have a finished basement, so they let him kind of have that space for himself. And so this is when he became the alcoholic that isolated and drank, and then got on the phone to call people. He was no longer a social drinker. He was an alone drinker. He had to be alone. He had to drink. And at the same time, being alone made him panic. And that's when I think the phone calls would start, because he was alone. And I think he understood what was happening to his body and his mind. He would try to not drink, but that's why you need to go to the hospital and get yourself some Librium to help come off of the alcohol, because DTs and withdrawal, I mean, and I have witnessed this later, when he was later in it. DTs, the sweating and the shaking and talking to people that aren't there. He would fight it as long as he absolutely possibly could, and he would try to divide it into, well, I'm going to drink this much. He would have to drink in the morning. I'm going to drink this much, and then I'll be okay for a while, and I'm going to go try to look for a job, and never getting there because of the panic, like agoraphobia. And so even though he wanted to not be living this life, he was stuck there, like biologically and medically, because of the alcohol. It was no longer a crutch or a choice. It was an imperative. Things didn't work out there. And they had a young son, and they told him he had to leave because they just didn't want to expose their son to this depressing alcoholic who sometimes had outbursts when, like, people wouldn't talk to him on the phone, and he'd throw stuff. And so he was there, and our father would not let him live with him because my father he's been in recovery for a very long time. And his wife, not my mom, this was his next wife, was addicted to pills and alcohol, and he took care of her until she died suddenly. And he had just done that, and he was not about to have another alcoholic in his home. So he said, "No, you can't come here. I can't let you come here." And my mother and I talked about it, and I said, well, if something happens to him and I had said no, I'll feel really bad. So maybe if we give him a chance, if we give it a chance and it doesn't work out and we have to ask him to leave, at least we know we tried. And I'm going to leave it there. And next time I will talk about what life was like with him in our home. And physically what he was going through, what horrible things chronic alcoholism does to you physically. So I will talk to you later.